Please be seated. You may continue.
Thank you. Mr. Curie, before lunch, I asked you about being interviewed by Mr. Offenbecker. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
That was a telephone interview, is that right?
Correct.
That's because you're back in Toronto now?
Yes.
And that was set up ahead of time, wasn't it?
Correct.
You weren't just surprised with a phone call. You knew it was going to happen.
That is correct.
And before it happened, you were supplied with your reports, weren't you?
Yes, I was.
And there's two basic reports, I believe, that you have there. One's dated February 16, 2007. Is that right?
Yes, I have that one.
And you have another one dated June 5, 2006.
Yes.
Those were both provided to you, right?
Correct.
Okay. And the prosecutors were on the phone.
Yes, they were.
And you had a chance to review these reports before the interview.
Correct.
And during the interview, do you recall Mr. Offenbecker told you to assume that the body was out in the elements in January for some period of time, approximately 10 days or so?
Mm-hmm.
Do you recall him telling you that?
I don't recall that word for word, no.
Do you have a copy of the interview?
I do not.
Okay. Would you please mark this as an exhibit?
Defendant's Exhibit 108.
I'm sorry, that was 108.
Mr. Curie, I'm going to hand up to you what's been marked as Exhibit 108. And does that indicate that it's a transcript of an interview of James Curry, your name might be spelled wrong there, on July 15, 2013? Do you see that?
Yes, I do. Yes.
Okay. Would you please take a look at page 29 of the interview?
Okay.
And would you see, look, about 4 paragraphs up from the bottom where it has, on the left side, it says Speaker Cooper Offenbecker, and it starts off, and that body was then found. Tell me if you...
Right. I found it, yes.
And do you see where Mr. Offenbecker said the body was out in the elements in January for some period of time, approximately 10 days or so?
Correct, yes.
Okay. Now, you also received information in this case at the time that it was assigned to you, or the time that you got it, from one of the investigating detectives. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Do you recall who that detective was? And maybe I can refer you. I don't want you to guess
Sure.
on that. But would you take a look at your June 5, 2006 report? Do you have that in front of you?
I do.
And during the break, I pointed out to you that there are numbers, there's stamps with numbers on the bottom right.
Yes.
Would you please go to page, and there's some initials there, MDP, forget about that, but it says 4707.
Okay.
And do you see where that form says phone notes there?
Yes.
Is that something that's in your handwriting?
Yes, it is.
Would you have put it down contemporaneously, or almost contemporaneously, with the time that you had that phone conversation?
Yes.
Okay. And as far as you know, it's accurate?
Yes.
Okay. Does that indicate that you received a phone call, or maybe you made a phone call to Detective Decker?
Are you talking about the 14th of February?
Yeah, I guess it starts off on the 14th of February, but there's another one that says March 2nd, 2006. Do you see that?
I do. That was an in-person meeting, yes.
Okay. And, that was at the Washington State, is that Patrol Crime Lab?
Correct.
WSPCL?
Yes.
And you have some notes there, and one note says, on February 6, 2006, victim found dead, Dead-End Street in blackberry bushes.
Correct, yes.
There's some other information there, right?
Yes, there is, yes.
Okay. Certainly you didn't copy down all the information given to you during that meeting.
No.
It's likely, though, that during the give and take, you might have asked when the person, Ms. Pietz, went missing or was reported missing. That might be important for you to know also.
I didn't write that information down, so I don't know if I asked it or if it came out. I don't have it here.
That would have certainly been available, though, if you decided to ask it.
Correct.
And in terms of your answers today as to why or why not swabbing might or might not have captured some usable DNA from Ms. Pietz, you were telling us, well, it makes some difference how long the body was outside before it was retrieved, right?
That's a factor, yes.
Okay. Now, in terms of this case, you're aware, obviously, from this, or you were aware that the body was found in February of 2013, and having lived out here, you know that that's a cold time of year out here, right?
Correct, yes.
I mean, it's cool, it's damp?
Correct.
Okay. Now, what I'd like to do is ask you about the automobile. Now, the inside of the automobile and the parts of the outside were swabbed, right?
That's correct, yes.
By the automobile, that's the Volkswagen Jetta automobile. Do you understand?
I don't have a recollection.
Well, just assume that that is it. I don't think that's going to be controversial, and I don't want you to take any time to find it necessarily. But again, we've heard earlier that you didn't do that swabbing.
That's correct, I did not.
Okay. So let me ask you some questions about laying down DNA. Presumably, if I or some other person places their hand on this counter here, we probably lay down some DNA, right?
Possibly.
Possibly. Some people do, some people don't, right?
That is correct.
And it depends on some other factors, too. How recently you washed your hands, right?
The duration of contact.
Duration of
The
contact.
surface type, yes.
But let's assume that I put down some DNA, and I'm the type of person that puts down DNA, and I put down some DNA there. And you come by a little bit later, and you put your hand down in approximately the same position. In a situation like that, we're likely to have what's known as a mixture.
Correct, that's possible, yes.
Okay. Is there something different called layers, or is that the same as a mixture?
I'm not aware of layer. I'm going to say that's probably the same as a mixture.
Okay. So that's possibly will happen, right? A mixture, possibly.
If both people leave DNA behind?
Yes. Okay. I mean, just because one person puts down their hand in the same spot as another doesn't mean that you only have one type of DNA there. I mean, one person's DNA. You could have both their DNA.
Potentially, yes.
Okay,
They both
and-
leave DNA behind.
Again, factors, if they lay them down and if they're the type of person that exudes DNA, et cetera, right?
Correct, yes.
And in your analysis in this case, there were some mixtures you looked at. That was like a mixture of David's DNA and his late wife Nicole's DNA, right?
Correct,
Okay? And that's the type of analysis that you're trained to do.
yes.
Now, assuming that somebody comes by afterwards and swabs for DNA and finds your DNA and my DNA, that doesn't mean there wasn't somebody else here an hour before me who put their hand down there, right?
Correct.
Okay, well, let me use an example here then. Assume that on January 27th, well, okay, assume that the automobile in question is an automobile that's driven by both David Pietz and Nicole Pietz, okay, at different times. Yes?
All right.
And assume that on January 27th, which was a Friday, Mrs. Pietz drove the automobile to work. Yes?
Okay.
That after work she drove it to a Schwab Tire Center.
All
Okay?
right.
That a mechanic at the Schwab Tire Center drove her car from the parking lot into the area where there's a lift and parked it there. Okay?
All right.
And assume after repairing the tire, took it down off the lift and drove it back to where it was parked before. Okay?
Okay.
And Mrs. Pietz then drove the car home, right?
All right.
And assume that the mechanic wasn't wearing gloves. Okay?
All right.
So in that type of situation, the mechanic's DNA might or might not be there, right, in the car.
That is correct.
And as you were telling us, that depends on a lot of factors, right?
Correct.
How much DNA the mechanic exudes as one of these natural processes, right?
Correct, yes.
And then where he might have touched, yes, in the car.
Right, yes.
And then where the people who collected the DNA swabbed, if they swabbed the place where they might have touched, right?
Correct.
Okay. Now, in a situation like this that I'm giving you, presumably both the mechanic, and assuming this is an automatic shift car, both the mechanic and Ms. Pietz, or any driver of the car, would presumably have to use the shifter to shift the car's gears to make it go, right?
Presumably, yes.
Okay. Have you seen the shifter in this case?
I have not.
Okay. Well, let me show you what's been previously marked as State's Exhibit number 49. And,
Actually, that's admitted.
oh, marked in, sorry, as Exhibit 49.
It's okay, you can show it, but I'm just saying for the record.
Thank you, Your Honor. Exhibit 49. Looks like a shifter now
Yeah, it does, yes.
for an automatic shift car.
Sure.
Okay. Is this the type of surface that would tend to collect DNA or not so much?
It's a smooth surface, so it's possible.
It's better to have a rough surface, though.
Yes.
Okay. In terms of the steering wheel, there was both Nicole's DNA found on it and Mr. Pietz's DNA, right?
Okay. Take a
Sure,
look.
feel free.
Correct.
Okay, and a steering wheel is and again, I'm not asking you to tell me about the steering wheel in this Volkswagen, but we all know from our own experience, and I ask you if you could agree, is a circular device that has 360 degrees. People can hold it at different positions, right?
Correct.
And in the scenario I gave you, the mechanic would have handled the steering wheel, right?
Right.
Now, you didn't find any third-party DNA on the steering wheel, did you? I mean, besides Nicole and David's, right?
If I assume that both those individuals are part of the mixed profiles, no, I did not.
And maybe I'm missing something. Mixed profiles mean you could have somebody else's DNA also?
Well, I've detected mixed profiles on both samples from the steering wheel. I can't definitively say that David Pietz and Nicole Pietz contributed that DNA. I can say that DNA within the sample matches their DNA, but I can't say definitively they're the source of that DNA.
Okay, it could match other people's DNA too because it's a mixture.
It's a mixture, correct.
And that's less exact than having a single sample or whatever that's called.
There are more potential options in terms of sources of DNA that you have to consider.
Okay. And for there to be a mixture on the steering wheel, the two people would have grasped the steering wheel in the same position, right?
I don't know how it was swabbed. I don't know if they just swabbed certain areas or if it was swabbed.
Okay.
I'm not sure of the swabbing technique.
Okay. So I guess what I'm getting at is the fact that somebody's DNA, who, at least for purposes of my scenario, was in the car, the fact that their DNA, or at least an unknown DNA, was not found doesn't mean that they weren't there in the car the day before.
Correct. In fact, they may well be in this mixture. I don't have a comparison sample from the mechanic.
Okay?
They may be as a possible contributor to the mixture.
Okay. And the fact that their DNA isn't found on the shifter doesn't mean that they weren't in the car the night before shifting it. I think you said on the shifter, the top part of the shifter, you only found David's. On the bottom part, you found David's and some unknown sample that you couldn't identify.
Correct. So for both those scenarios, there are two samples taken. The one I've designated the gear shifter, I've matched to David Pietz. It doesn't mean that in your scenario the mechanic didn't handle it also. Correct.
Or that Nicole Pietz didn't handle it also, too.
Correct.
Okay. Now, you talked about the windshield wiper knob or controller, and you found a mixed sample there also, didn't you?
Yes. Yes, it is a mixed sample. Correct.
Okay. And on that, was there more of David's DNA or Nicole's DNA, or couldn't you tell?
Again, I just want to state that I'm not saying that their DNA is on this or in this mixture. They are possible sources.
Okay.
However, if I assume that they are there, the contributions are approximately equal.
Okay. Knowing it was a mixed sample of DNA, or possibly a mixed sample of DNA from Nicole and David, you can't tell who the last person was to drive this car, can you?
No, I cannot.
With regard to other parts of the car where you might have mixtures, you can't tell from a mixture, even if one person laid down more DNA than the other person, who the last person was to drive the car, right?
I cannot.
Okay. That's not scientifically viable, or one isn't scientifically able to do so, right?
There are just so many, as you stated, so many variables that you can enter a vehicle and not leave your DNA. You can enter your vehicle and leave your DNA. You can sneeze in a vehicle and leave your DNA. It doesn't mean you entered the vehicle. So there are just so many variables that it's just not quantifiable in that sense.
And I think you also said, at least during the interview, that the amounts of DNA we're talking about here, either from Nicole or David or the mixtures, we're talking very small amounts of DNA, aren't we, relatively?
For most of the samples that I analyzed, DNA was not actually detected, or for many of the samples that were analyzed, DNA was not detected, or it was a low amount of DNA.
Now, I'd like to ask you about the Percocet bottle that you examined, and I can refer you to the page if you want, but were you the one that swabbed that bottle?
I did not.
Okay, well, let me refer you to a page here and ask if you could explain this to me. Could you please go to page, it's just going to take me a second to find it. Page, this is in your February 16, 2007 report, if you have that.
I do.
And then the lower right-hand corner, go to page 4868.
Okay,
And this talks about the Percocet bottle.
correct.
And we're using the word Percocet and Endocet, I think, to mean the same thing here. Is that right? Or do you know?
I believe it was described as Nicole's empty Endocet bracket Percocet bracket prescription bottle.
Okay. I'm going to hand you what's been shown to you already and marked and admitted as Exhibit 46. Does this appear to be the same bottle that was tested in the lab?
It does appear to be, yes.
You have a photograph of that, right?
I do.
And if you would take a look at, did I refer you to page 4868?
Yes, you did.
You have that there.
I do.
And that page is dated June 23, 2006.
Yes.
And there's some initials there on the upper right. Whose initials are those?
There are two sets of initials. The one on the left-hand side, Tara Roy, T-A-R-A, Roy, R-O-W, R-O-Y, pardon me. The second set is my set of initials.
Okay. And the first set of initials, does that belong to somebody who works in your lab?
Yes.
Okay. And looking down at the last paragraph, it says, using a sterile swab moistened with sterile water, the edge and sides of the cap were swabbed gently, and the swab was placed in a sterile tube in preparation for possible future DNA STR analysis. Was that Ms. Roy's entry there?
Yes.
Okay. So what is her job description, or what was it at the lab back in 2006?
At the time, Tara Roy was an employee of the state lab. She was a screening technologist, so her primary duties were to screen evidence and identify vital fluids or swab for DNA analysis.
Okay, and as far as you know, she was well-trained in swabbing.
Yes.
Okay. And it says here then she swabbed the edge and the sides of the cap. Yes?
Yes, correct.
Okay. Do you know why she also didn't swab the bottle itself, the plastic bottle? Any reason?
Primarily because it's a smooth, potentially a smooth surface, so her focus was, for the most part, on the ridged surface on the cap, on that side portion.
Because it's more likely somebody opening the bottle would leave DNA there, on the ridged
There's
cap
a
surface.
higher expectation there, yes.
Okay. And also, I suppose it's relatively impossible to open the bottle without putting your fingers on the side ridge of the cap, right?
Correct.
And that cap came up positive for DNA.
It did, yes.
And would you like to refer to the page where you have that findings? I can refer you to that.
I have it right here.
Okay. And a DNA profile was established, created, built? Is a better word, I know.
Yes, it was determined, yes.
Determined. And that was Nicole Pietz.
It matches Nicole Pietz, yes.
Right. And David Pietz's DNA wasn't on that bottle.
No, not that I detected.
Just need a second, Your Honor. Just about finished. Thank you. No further questions. Thank you, sir.
You're right.
In the hypothetical that Mr. Allen posed to you about Les Schwab, if the mechanic was wearing gloves, would they be likely to leave DNA?
If he was wearing gloves, no. Unless he had DNA on the exterior of the gloves.
Fair enough. I want to go over something that was asked early on. You were asked questions by Mr. Allen about being surprised, or whether you were surprised that there wasn't DNA or detectable DNA on some of the body swabs. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And I just want to clarify and ask again, can you explain, can there be an effect on the ability to get DNA in a swab from a dead body when someone's deceased?
Can you get DNA from a dead body? Yes, you can.
Can it be more difficult? I believe you had started to explain in cross-examination about when someone's deceased, what may or may not happen to their skin. Is there anything that makes it perhaps less likely to get it once someone has passed away?
When somebody's deceased and left in an environment where there's moisture or bacteria or ultraviolet light, those factors, or potentially heat, and I understand that's not a parameter for this scenario, but those other factors do contribute, as well as the internal decay of the body, do contribute to general DNA degradation. There's no knowing how fast or quickly that would occur, but DNA was detected in several of those samples, was not able to develop a DNA profile, and an explanation is DNA is there, likely it's degraded. Another possible explanation is the environment with which the swabs were taken. If you look at the bench notes, I've indicated on the neck swabs and the exterior body swabs that they're either sandy or coated with forest debris. So we know that those are factors or potential factors that can inhibit the DNA analysis process. So I've detected DNA. The process that we use to detect DNA doesn't tell me if it's degraded, and it doesn't tell me if there are any inhibitor cofactors that might be present from the soil, also with the DNA. What I can surmise from the lack of DNA profile, which does surprise me, and you can see from my bench notes I've attempted several times to clean up the samples, is I'm still not able to get a DNA profile. Either it's due to degradation or it's due to inhibitor factors from the soil.
Council also had referred you to, I believe, a page of your notes, and I think it was the bottom right corner of our copy says MDP 4707. I think for your notes, it's in your notes attached to your June 5th, 06 report, page 1 of 123, I believe. Do you have that there?
I do.
He asked you
Can
some
you tell me the
questions.
page again, Council? I'm sorry.
It's for MDP, it's 4707. He'd asked you some questions about that, and at that meeting that you had on March 2nd that you testified to with some of the detectives, did you get told how long the body may have been out before recovered?
I don't see that I've recorded that information, so I don't think it was told to me because I've made extensive notes otherwise. So that wasn't relayed to me. Clearly I didn't ask for it because I haven't noted that either.
And counsel also referred you, and I think you still have the exhibit, it's your defense interview on exhibit 108 on the floor down there in front of you.
Yes.
He had referred you to pages, I think page 28 and to 29 of that document.
Yes.
And he had made reference to the fact that Mr. Offenbecker, his colleague, had posed a hypothetical about whether if the body had been out for several days. And I believe never elicited whether you answered that question. Can you just review page 28 and the top of page 29? Did you ever say in that interview that when you were told the body could have been out for a long time, that it was surprising to not get DNA? Take your time to just review that.
Not with relation to that scenario. No, we were talking about David Pietz's DNA.
So let me ask you another question, I guess, which is perhaps more important. In light of the possibility the body had been out for several days, and in light of what you just talked about, is it surprising that you weren't able to develop a DNA profile from those swabbings to you, Mr. Corey?
I would say I would expect to develop a DNA profile. Having not developed a DNA profile, and given the case circumstances, there is an explanation as to why I could not develop a DNA profile.
And that's relating to the things you talked about in terms of perhaps soil inhibitors,
Correct.
things you just testified to.
Correct.
I want to refer you again to some questions Mr. Allen was asking you about the steering wheel swab, specifically, I believe that was AAM88K.
Okay.
And I just want to clarify, I believe you said that, go ahead and get to that, and then I'll ask you the questions.
All right.
And I believe you said that was a mixture that included both David and Nicole Pietz, is that right?
Correct.
And am I correct, you had DNA information at all 10 locations, is that right?
9 plus the sex marker. There's one additional location that we use to test for sex.
Okay, so
Yes.
9 plus the location that tells you if it's male or female.
Correct.
At all, let's talk about the 9 locations. At all 9 of those locations, was it consistent with the markers that Dave and Nicole Pietz have at those locations?
Nicole Pietz and David Pietz possess information at each one of those locations, excuse me, that's found in that mixture.
And they, in fact, account, if it is in fact them, it accounts for all of the DNA that you get in those locations. Is that right?
If, excuse me, if they are the source of the DNA profile from the steering wheel, they account for all the bits of DNA I detected, and there's no unaccounted for DNA. Correct.
And again, with the kit that you were using, if you get a match to one individual, for example, if we weren't dealing with a mixture, if you had a match to one individual at all 9 locations, you would consider that a full profile. Is that right?
If I got results at all 9 locations and there was no indication of a mixture, that would be a full profile. And then I could determine if there's a match to any of the reference samples.
Thank you. And if you could turn to the AAM88F again, the windshield wiper control knob.
Yes?
And again, am I correct, is that a mixture that included both Nicole Pietz and David Pietz?
As possible contributors, yes.
And again, on that sample, did you have DNA information at all 9 locations plus the sex marker?
Yes, I did.
And similar to the one we just talked about on the steering wheel, was it consistent with David and Nicole Pietz at all of those locations?
Both those individuals account for DNA in that mixture. And if I assume that they are contributors to the mixture, there's no DNA that's not accounted for.
And let's talk for a moment again about the gear shift. Council was brought out, I believe, the actual gear shift, but I know you did not see. You just received a swab, is that right?
Correct.
And you looked at both a gear shift swab and an underside gear shift swab.
That's correct.
And what would be your understanding what the underside gear shift swab was?
I would suppose underneath the silver depression. Again, I'm just guessing, but I would assume it would be this area underneath the knob, the button.
And talking about the underside gear shift swab, that matched David Pietz at all locations, is that right?
For the underside?
Yes.
The
Oh, I'm
major
sorry,
profile.
there
yes.
was some trace DNA as well, so,
Excuse me, I didn't hear that answer.
yeah, let me go back over,
She interrupted him a bit.
and I apologize.
Why don't you rephrase the original question, let him answer?
I'm going to actually just let him answer completely because I interrupted him. Go ahead and tell me what your results were for that.
Yes. It's a mixed DNA profile. The major, excuse me, the major male DNA profile matches that of David Pietz.
And again, it matches him at all 9 locations, is that right?
That is correct.
So the reason that it's a mixed is because at one of those locations, you found some additional DNA that his profile doesn't account for.
Correct.
And that is consistent with Nicole Pietz at that location. In other words, at that location, that extra DNA is the same as she has at that location.
Correct.
And lastly, the gear shift itself, AAM88H,
Okay.
was David Pietz. This matched David Pietz at all locations, is that right?
Yes, excuse me, at 8 locations, yes.
And he was the only contributor. I mean, in other words, there wasn't extra DNA as we had in the one we just talked about, the underside, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you, Mr. Curry. I'm done. I don't have any other questions.
I just have a follow-up. Mr. Curry, I couldn't help but notice that when you were asked questions about the mixtures, and you were asked if these mixtures, and I forget the exact question, maybe you could help me with this, but you answered them, if they are, meaning if Mr. Pietz and Mrs. Pietz are the source of the DNA, then you would say that they were the people that laid down the DNA in those spots. Is that what you're saying?
No, I think the question was, is there any DNA that's foreign? That's my understanding. Is there any foreign DNA that's not accounted for by those 2 people if they are on that item?
Okay, so you said, assuming that these 2 people are on that item, there's no foreign DNA.
Yes, assuming that with respect to the mixture in question, if the assumption is that Nicole Pietz and David Pietz are the sources of that DNA, is there any foreign DNA that they have not accounted for?
Okay, but you need to make that assumption in order to give that answer about the foreign DNA.
Correct, and I think I've stated previously in my testimony, I'm not saying these people are in the mixtures.
Okay, so it's a little bit of circular reasoning there, I suppose. If they are, then they are, right?
No, I believe Crown was using an assumption, and I followed the assumption. You used an assumption, and I followed your assumption. You're asking me to make assumptions, and I'm answering, assuming that your assumption is correct. This is my answer.
Okay, very good. And just one question here. When you said Crown, you're talking the prosecutor, right?
Pardon me, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, up there, they call me your lordship.
I thought it was your highness,
My
sir.
mistake.
Thank you. No further
You may
questions.
step down. I'm still the judge.
Oh, yes. No. Oh.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hanks. The next step is by video, and I'm going to ask that the CV and transcript be marked for the record and admitted for the record.
Well, the transcript doesn't go back to the jury room.
It's not.
It can be it can be marked as part of the record. They'll both get it.
Who is the witness?
It's Catherine Woodard, Your Honor. There's that. There's this. Yes, and I didn't intend for it to go back. I understood that we needed to mark it for the record.
Marking States Exhibits 109 and 110.
And Your Honor, for the court's
This was a
information-
deposition.
Correct. For the court's information, it's about 33 minutes. So
We'll go
what,
ahead.
would you like to do it before the break?
Anybody need a recess right now? All right. And the court order doesn't. She doesn't have to type during the deposition, so she gets a recess either way. Members of the jury, a deposition are questions asked out of court. Both sides are permitted to be there, and in fact, I presume were there in this case, both lawyers. The witness is placed under oath and is asked questions by both sides, and then it is, in the old days, it was just written down on a transcript, and they read the transcript. More frequently these days, it's videotaped or CD taped. I guess tape is an old word, isn't it? It's recorded on a CD, and you will see that recording. And to the extent, as far as possible, you consider it the same as if the witness were testifying in court. And it is just testimony. The fact that it's played on the screen doesn't make any different than what the witness would say if they were on the stand. So you don't get a copy of this back in the jury room. You don't get the transcript in the jury room. You're just going to hear the testimony as if the witness was sitting right here when giving the testimony. It's admitted for the file. It's not admitted as an exhibit. The CD doesn't go back to jury. It gets played. It's admitted to be played.
Raise your right hand. Please. You do solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do. Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Can you state your first and last name, please?
Sure. Catherine Woodard.
And can you spell your last name?
Woodard.
And what is your current occupation?
I'm a forensic scientist in the DNA section at the Washington State Patrol Crime Laboratory in Seattle.
How long have you worked for the Washington State Patrol Crime Lab?
Approximately 12 years.
And have you always held the same position?
Yes, I was hired as a forensic scientist too, and was promoted to forensic scientist 2, and was promoted subsequently to forensic scientist 3, but the same position as far as the DNA testing.
What is the difference between a forensic scientist 2 versus 3?
Simply experience level.
And is there any higher level you can obtain beyond 3?
There is a technical lead position that is considered a forensic scientist 4, as well as supervisory position, which would be a 5.
And your general job duties as a forensic scientist 3 are what?
I perform body fluid identification and DNA STR testing in criminal cases on evidence items.
What is your educational background?
I have a Bachelor of Science degree from the University of Washington in cell and molecular biology. I had 12 months of on-the-job training when I began my position, and I also attended a course at the California Criminalistics Institute on DNA STR testing.
And prior to working for the Washington State Patrol Crime Lab, did you have any other prior job in the DNA field?
Yes, I did. Following my degree, I worked at a private DNA testing laboratory called Genelex for several years, as well as performing DNA research at the University of Washington for several years.
And while you're employed at the Washington State Patrol Crime Lab, do you have to be certified or recertified or tested yearly or biannually?
Yes, we have to perform proficiency tests twice yearly to ensure that we are proficient in the type of testing that we're performing.
Were you assigned at some point to analyze some hair evidence in the homicide case of Nicole Pietz?
Yes, I was.
And specifically, did you actually look at some hair?
I did.
Can you just explain how is one able to get a DNA profile from hair?
Sure. The hair itself has a distal end and a root end. The root end is the end that was anchored at one time in the scalp of an individual, and that is the end that we focus on for DNA testing, because that is the end that may have some cells adhering, which would be where the DNA would be present, as opposed to the shaft of the hair, which is not the same type of material and would not contain the autosomal DNA that we are testing for.
There's been some other testimony about types of things you can obtain DNA from. If you obtain DNA evidence from a hair root, is it going to be the same profile from a person's hair as it might be from a person's blood?
The DNA profile, if it is obtained from cellular material that was adhering to the root because of it being anchored in the scalp, then yes, it will be the same DNA profile that any cells from that individual could be tested.
Okay, so if you got a DNA profile from my skin cells or my blood, if you were able to get one from my hair, it would match.
Yes.
Now, in this particular case, the Pietz case, did you examine an item entitled ME25?
Yes, I did.
What was that item that you received?
If I could refer to my notes
Sure.
and state exactly what it was listed as. Item ME25 was a sealed paper bag that contained, ME25 was a sealed paper bag containing a sheet with debris from underbody and 2 plastic bags containing slide-mounted hairs.
And 2 plastic bags containing slide-mounted hairs. What exactly does that mean?
That means that an analyst in our laboratory, her name was Kathy Guile, she previously analyzed this item, ME25, specifically for the hairs, and made some collections and observations and issued a report regarding her findings, and those 2 plastic bags were assembled by her.
And was your assignment with this to attempt to get DNA profiles from hairs?
Yes, I was assigned to do DNA testing on that, specifically the hairs from those plastic bags from that item.
And did you look at all of the hairs?
I did not look at all of the hairs. I looked at the hairs that were previously determined by forensic scientist Kathy Guile to be suitable for DNA testing.
And specifically, which hairs or how many hairs did you look at?
From this item, I looked at 2 hairs that she had designated as number 3 and number 5 as being suitable for DNA testing.
And let me just first ask you, what was the description of those hairs? What color were they? What length were they?
If I could refer to her report. According to her report, in item ME25, she listed these 2 hairs as being 2 brown head hairs, 7 inches and 7.5 inches in length, with bulbous roots.
Now, did you use what Kathy Guile had done and the work she had presented in her report to decide which hairs you should look at?
I did.
Okay. And did Kathy Guile provide a description and also whether there were roots on the hairs in her report?
Yes, she did.
And did you rely upon that to do your work?
Yes, I did.
What makes, you talked about roots, what makes a particular piece of hair suitable for DNA testing?
The hair itself has to have a root for us to consider it for DNA testing at all. If it has been fragmented in that the root itself has been removed, in theory there's no DNA going to be present for testing. As such, there's no cells that are adhering any longer.
So if there was a hair that didn't have a root, would you ignore that and not even attempt to get DNA from that?
Not the type of DNA testing that we perform now. The STR DNA testing requires cellular material to be present.
And so just so I'm clear, did both hairs 3 and 5 meet the criteria that you described that would be suitable for DNA testing?
According to Kathy's examinations, yes.
And so based on that examination, did you make the decision to then further examine those for DNA?
Yes, I did.
Can you describe the process you followed to do that?
To extract DNA from the
Yeah.
hairs? Yes, I removed just the root end of the hair, 4 or 5 millimeters of it, into a tube and applied chemicals to extract the DNA from any cellular material that may be present on that item. Following that, I do a quantification step to give a good estimate on how much DNA is present. And following that, I will analyze it by PCR amplification, which will basically work like a biochemical photocopy machine to give us many, many copies of the same sequence that we are looking at. And then the last part of the process would be to analyze it by capillary electrophoresis, which separates the DNA molecules by size so that we can analyze them.
Let me first ask you, did you individually do the DNA process on hairs 3 and 5, or did you combine them?
I combined both of those hair roots into one tube.
Why was that?
Based on the fact that they were very similar in their presentation and the fact that they came from the same area, it is beneficial to combine certain items so that you can maximize the amount of DNA present in your sample to obtain a DNA result.
And the process that you just described, let's start first with the extraction process. Is that essentially the same process that's done when you're attempting to extract DNA from other bodily fluids or blood?
Yes, it is. The extraction process for hairs is slightly different in that there's one extra chemical, which is a reducing agent to help break down the material, but the rest of it is the same.
Okay. And the additional chemicals just because of the nature of hair?
Yes, it is.
And were you able to obtain any type of DNA profile from hairs 3 and 5 of ME25?
My result was a trace amount of DNA of limited genetic information was obtained from hairs 3 and 5.
What does that mean?
That means I did detect DNA, however, it was at such a level that I was not able to compare it to any reference samples.
So if you had a sample from a person, you would not be able to say whether it was or wasn't that person?
Correct.
And was that just simply based on how low the levels of DNA were?
Yes.
Were you surprised when you had roots that you weren't able to get a DNA profile off of those?
No, it's not an unusual result from hairs.
I want to ask you a question about what a reference sample is. What does that mean to you in your work?
Sure. A reference sample is a DNA profile that was obtained from a known sample taken from an individual that is used for comparison purposes.
Did you or were you given a reference sample from Nicole Pietz?
Yes, I was.
What form did that come to you in?
It was a blood stain card.
And did you obtain a DNA profile from Nicole Pietz?
I did.
And is that a profile that if you had gotten enough DNA in the hair, you might have been able to compare to the hair roots that you looked at?
Yes, it was.
Were you able to make any comparisons between Nicole Pietz's DNA profile and the DNA you got on ME25, those hairs?
I was not.
What is it about hairs that makes it not unusual to not be able to get a DNA profile?
Generally, hairs are going to have a very low amount of DNA to begin with, overall, but sometimes there are a larger amount of cellular cells adhering to the root end, and that allows a larger amount of DNA to be extracted, but overall, it's not uncommon to obtain no DNA result or a trace amount of DNA.
Did you also obtain what was called a vaginal wash to examine in this case?
Yes, I obtained vaginal wash glass slides that were collected and produced by the ME.
And what was your understanding of what those were?
I understood that these were something that was collected and produced at the autopsy of Nicole Pietz.
And what, I guess, do you receive that in liquid form? What's the form that you got that in?
These were 9 glass slides that were provided.
And what were you asked to do with those?
I was asked to determine if any sperm cells may be present on those slides.
And how do you go about doing that?
I microscopically examined them at a certain intensity as they were stained slides to determine if I could detect any sperm cells.
And did you use a microscope to look at all 9 slides?
I did.
And were you able to see any sperm?
I did not detect any sperm in those slides.
What was the purpose for you of attempting to see if there was any sperm on those slides?
If there had been sperm detected, I would have subsequently removed the cover slips and attempted a DNA extraction to determine who may have contributed those cells.
So are you able to get a DNA profile from sperm?
Yes.
When you did not observe any sperm, did you do anything more with those vaginal wash slides?
I did not.
One thing I didn't ask you, Ms. Woodard, I think, is the reference sample that you got from Nicole Pietz, the blood stain. Did that also come from the medical examiner?
I believe so, yes.
Thank you. I don't have any other questions for you.
Your Honor, may we actually take a break after the direct questions instead of waiting till the end?
Objection?
No, Your Honor.
So you're talking about right now?
Yeah, if that would be okay with the
Okay,
board.
somebody has a reason to take a break on this. Take a break.
Thank you.
Do I properly surmise this is a call of nature, not as to a point of law?
Actually, Your Honor, I realized that.
Oh, there is a point of law?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
As I was looking ahead, I realized that after my question and before Mr. Offenbecker's, he had leaned over and asked me something. It showed up in the transcript, so I'm guessing it's audible here. It's nothing prejudicial, but I didn't know.
Who leaned over?
Defense counsel, and I didn't know if he'd been in
He
court.
asked you something?
Yeah, and if he was in court, I'm pretty sure he wouldn't have said it loud enough for the jury to hear, so I wanted to make sure we didn't play it for them, so I went over.
What did he ask you?
Nothing. He just asked whether we were going to go into this certain area of testimony.
Oh.
So in an abundance of caution, I didn't want to play it.
You just want to run it past that? I assume there's no objection.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry, I thought.
No, it's okay. I didn't
The way
know how
you
to-
asked the question, I thought, gee, somebody needs a break, and it's not to
And
ask
I'm
me
sure
to
that's
break.
what the jury thinks, but that's fine.
That's all right, I'm sure they needed a break too.
All right, thank you, Your Honor.
All right, we'll take our afternoon recess.
Get it to my-
one did you think was?
I think Laredo has the most sites in it.
I'm sorry?
Not Laredo, Luoma.
Okay, thank you.
It has good case sites in it.
Yep.
Are we treating 110 transcript the same as 109?